So thank you for joining us today for the Trachtenberg School's PhD panel on careers in academia. We have four wonderful alumni panelists here today, and Professor Bert Barno will be moderating the panel. I will be monitoring the chat and the waiting room. So I am going to turn it over to Bert to get us started. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise, and thanks to our panel for agreeing to come and share your experiences with us. I noticed that at least one person in the audience actually either has an academic job or did. I think, Melissa, isn't that right? Yep. So you might feel free to contribute to, even though you're not an official panel member, to any of the questions that come up. And thanks for joining us. So I think we should start with maybe an easy question, and I'll ask each of you to tell the audience where you're teaching and have you always had an academic career, and if not, I know at least Jeff has not always been in academia. If not, where were you before and where might you go next? So I'll go clockwise according to my screen, which is different probably from yours, but we'll start with Megan.
Hello, I'm Megan Hatch. I'm an associate professor at Cleveland State University in the Urban Studies Department. So slightly different from Trachtenberg, but still related. I went straight from the PhD into this. So I've been in an academic job. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm at least there now and I have tenure. So not planning to leave anytime soon.
It's great. Okay. I'm sure I'm going to get your name wrong. Mariglynn, is that how you say it? Or close?
Yeah, it's Mariglynn.
Mariglynn, okay.
Yeah, so I'm Mariglynn Edlins. I am just up the road from y'all. I'm in Baltimore at the University of Baltimore, where I am an associate professor, and I teach across both the Human Services Administration programs and the Public Administration programs, and I direct our Doctor of Public Administration program. I'm really happy what I'm doing now, so I'm not planning on doing anything other than just continuing on. So,
and have you been there for your whole career?
Yeah, so I have been here for 12 years. I'm just finishing my 12th year as an academic, which is crazy.
Okay, sounds great. Saurabh?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Saurabh Lall. I'm an associate professor at the University of Glasgow at the business school. I've been here almost 2 years, but before this, I was at the School of Public Policy, Planning and Management at University of Oregon. So I've been in academia for about 8 years, but I actually worked before that at think tanks in DC. So I worked at the Aspen Institute, I worked at the World Resources Institute, and that was during my PhD. So I did my PhD part-time. I worked full-time at the think tanks. At some point, got interested in academic jobs. I didn't come into the PhD thinking that, but that's where I ended up, and I like it. So, yeah.
Okay, and Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Profiter. I'm at CU Denver. I know it's University of Colorado Denver, but the whole UCD branding thing, they force us to call it CU Denver, not to be confused with UC Davis or any of the other UCDs out in the universe. And I've been here since 17. Before that, I was at New York City Independent Budget Office. And that was right after the PhD program. I mean, I would really love to be back in local government. That's not to say I don't like my academic. It's awesome during the summer. But yeah, I miss the day-to-day chaos of local government policy. Yeah, so I don't know how long I'll be in academics. I will stay here as long. My wife's the breadwinner. She's like C-level school district stuff. So for all we know, next year we're somewhere else in the country. Who knows? And yeah, so thank you. Happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I noticed that that you're all in a lot of different kinds of schools. We've got urban studies, business school, and so it's quite mixed. So how do you find being in the kind of program you're in now? How hard or easy is that compared to you were educated, you got your PhD in a program of public policy and public administration, and I'm wondering how well that fits with your current environment. Maybe you could talk about that. Oh, anybody want to start, or we'll just go around again, the same order? Megan, then?
Sure, I can start. So our department's kind of a weirdo department. When I started, we were always a department, but we were a one department college. And now we're a one department school within a bigger college. I don't know. It just means that there's more committees I have to serve on. But what happens is we're urban studies, and then we divide into our two accredited programs into planning and PA. So I was hired on the PA side, which for those of you who knew me in the PhD, like I took the PA classes, but I'm a policy person through and through. But because I knew the PA stuff, like I've taught our intro to public administration, I've taught our capstone, but now I've moved more towards policy oriented courses. So that's really worked well for me. So it was kind of, I applied to jobs in policy schools and political science and urban studies and public administration. And that's, I ended up here, and it's worked out, but I think it's changed the trajectory of my research, and not in a bad way. I definitely do more urban focused stuff than I probably would have if I had been at a different school, but I enjoy it. So it works out, but it allows me to do kind of different things, but it did involve kind of, trying to convince myself and I guess the hiring committee that I could do different things than what I was specifically trained in.
Okay, Mariglynn?
It's such a good question, because I think the thing about a public administration, public policy degree is can be applied to so many different things. And my background was social work before I did the degree. And so I was naturally thinking about that in human services sort of organizations. And so I was able to get hired on a tenure track for a human services administration program, which is just an application of public administration, right? And so I did 10, 11 years there. And now I've switched over into also doing public administration, which is really nice because it's like coming home, because I did take all the PA classes and that was my arena. And I kind of had to just keep doing my research there while I was teaching human services administration, which is, they're related, but a little bit separate. And now I'm sort of back home in public administration.
Okay, great. Saurabh?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think my answer might wander in a few different places, to be honest. So I think, my PhD was obviously in public policy and administration. I was focused on social enterprise and, entrepreneurship in my PhD, which I think, it was fairly interdisciplinary, and I've had co-authors from all sorts of disciplines, which means that I guess I've been publishing in like public administration journals, but also in some business journals, also in like, nonprofit and development studies journals. I've been rejected from a wider range of journals. But I think, what that means is I think I've had to, learn from co-authors basically about how I'm writing differently. And then I think learn from peers about how I'm teaching different topics where, I do get to teach social enterprise. I do get to teach, things that I've studied in my PhD, but I'm also, sometimes teaching international management, which is not something I know much about in terms of my formal training, but, over time I've sort of learned to teach. I will also add, I think, especially at Oregon, I think I taught a lot of courses in nonprofit management and philanthropy, and there, I think my experience outside of academia was really helpful in teaching because I was able to bring in examples from, things I did fundraising at a nonprofit into the classroom as well. So I think that helped as well.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, so let's see how well it fits with the current environment. So I'm in the smallest school. So School of Public Affairs is department sized, but it's a school, and there's no like higher level like college above it. So it's just, provost and then schools. we're not departmentalized, even though we have a CJ and a PA sort of focus, but and that's kind of weird inter school politics. But from transitioning from PhD to this, well, 3 years in between, I think I was really lucky in that I haven't had to change anything about what I do. They had a need and I fit that need perfectly. I am studying and writing about literally the same thing today as I was 10, how long ago was this? 2011, 2012, when I was in my second or third year of the PhD program. So over 10 years, like nothing's changed about my research. And everyone seems happy with that. So I have no complaints, and I think the more than the actual name of like the degree, for a while there I had some concerns of whether or not policy and public administration would make it difficult to do the sort of stuff that I want to do. And I think having both the combination of the faculty vouch for you, plus in my case the applied work and doing the property tax economic stuff in New York City kind of like more than offsets any concerns that folks had that someone with a policy administration degree could actually do, in my case, the tax economic stuff that I'm teaching and researching.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to throw it open to see if people in the audience have questions. So, because what may be of interest to me may not be of interest to you. But one of the things that differs in our program from a lot of other schools, especially one that's highly ranked, is our students end up in a variety of environments. Some of them end up in universities and good jobs like you. Some end up in international organizations. Some are in government. Some are in for-profit research firms. So I think, and as our students in the audience are trying to figure out what they want to do, it might be interesting for them to know, how do you spend your time? What's the mix between research, teaching, boring committee meetings, things like that? So maybe we should mix it up. Let's start with Jeff this time.
Oh man, committees, right? That's the one thing they don't teach you that in PhD programs. Just whether it's the interpersonal stuff and then just sitting on committees, like if you really want to do research, I don't know, try to find a research line, I suppose, because students and homework can also get in the way of research. But it also depends on your contractual obligations. I'm 40-40-20, I think, is my distribution. So across research, teaching, service, that's what I'm contractually bound to do. Realistically, it ends up being something like 80-10-10. But like how I feel like I spread out my time, and it fluctuates. Some parts of the year are more teaching intensive than others. But yeah, so I still do mostly research, and I'm very happy that I still do mostly research. But I would say 3 weeks every semester, I'm doing nothing but teaching stuff. And then it seems like once every month, I'm doing an entire day or 2 days of committee stuff, but still way more research than the others.
By the way, I'd recommend a book for you. It's called Dear Committee Member. I don't know if you've seen that, but Jeff, you'd really like it based on your experiences. Okay, Saurabh.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll give a bit of perspective also, just for anyone who's interested in international jobs as well. So I mean, I think first it does change as you progress through. So I definitely had less like administrative duties as a junior assistant professor when I just started at Oregon. There's a lot of protected time that was great. So I didn't actually spend the first 2 years doing, too much committee work or anything like that. Teaching, obviously, but so make use of that time. I think once you get tenure, and that's when you get asked to take on more committee roles. So that's just my experience. I will say, I think the system in the UK is a bit different, where you have this like weird thing of hours being allocated. So every time you take on an administrative role, you have a certain number of hours allocated to that as part of your whole, 40-40-20 rule, whatever it is. Then it's not accurate, but I think in some ways it is nice to be able to sort of have that, where you can't get added to too many committees. You can kind of say like, that's my, limit. Or you have to take some teaching off. So I think, you can make those negotiations here. I think most of my time, I would say, still is good research. I think the difference is obviously the quality of that time. And so, when you want that sort of long period of uninterrupted time, that gets a little bit harder when you're on more committees. That's where, I think figuring out, I'd say, the 1 or 2 days a week, that if you can really kind of try to block that out, that's what I try to do. Is, I have a day where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to look at my emails till noon. And then I'm only going to look at them for 30 minutes, and then I'm not going to look at it for the rest of the day. So, finding those sort of big chunks of time, that's where I try to prioritize my research.
I think you've picked up a Scottish accent to some extent since you moved.
My daughter has, for sure. She's definitely, there's things that I'm like, I don't think you picked that up from me.
All right, Mariglynn.
I haven't read Dear Committee Member since I got tenure, and I feel like I need to go back and read it because it might give some levity to all of this. I think the thing about an academic job is you think you're getting a job, and in reality, you get 3 jobs, and it's your job to then balance and to determine. And one of the things I hear y'all talking about is we don't talk enough about boundaries of if you have a 60, 30, 20 or whatever, well, that doesn't add up. But, if you have this breakdown and it, institutionally, there's not always these calculations. And so you personally have to do calculations about how much time you spend on each of your 3 jobs, research, teaching, and service. And the thing is, if you try and do it as one job, they will give you enough teaching and service to be 3 full-time jobs. And it's sort of your responsibility to find a way to balance and to say no and to carve out the time to do the things that really matter to you, especially if that's research, because it is really hard to get the depth of time you need to be creative and to do the deep research that you need to be prolific. So I would say that it's so much about boundaries, and I wish as academics we were talking more about how to calculate our workload and our capacity and what it takes to do our jobs and figure out how to say no better, because it can be really hard. But if you like things that are always a little bit different and you sort of like juggling and kind of being a little bit chaotic all the time, it's a great place to thrive in that sense.
So someone had a question from North Carolina, asking what do we mean by committee? So what kind of committees are people on? Are they departmental committees, university committees, city committees, or what kind of committees are they?
Yes, literally all of them. For example, I'm the chair of our school curriculum committee. I'm on our promotion and tenure committee. I'm actually right now not doing community service, but I'm often on a community service committee. And then you might have like journals. So like I'm on 3 editorial boards and I'm an associate editor of another journal. And so you have like those kind of things. So it can definitely take over your life, and it can be a lot, or and it depends. Some schools, we were pretty good also about protecting the first couple of years. And then once you get tenure, they ask for more. But yeah, it can be at the school level, the university level, community. If you're really involved in professional associations, you might be on those kind of committees as well. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that sub question before I say how I do spend my time. Okay. So I teach, we often, and I don't think this was clear to me as a PhD student, maybe I was kind of oblivious, but it depends what type of university you're at, how much you teach. And so we're at what we call an R2, or I'm at an R2. So we're research intensive. We give doctoral grants, but we're not like, we give doctoral degrees, but we're not like the highest level of research productivity. But we have what's called a 2-2. So I generally teach 2 classes a semester. And so on semesters where I've already prepped the classes, like I teach undergrad stats. I've been teaching undergrad stats 2 times a year for 10 years. I show up, I do my slides. It takes me a half an hour to grade. I did it this morning at like 7:30 and I was done. And so like that is like automatic and like that takes no time at all. But then like last semester, I had a brand new doctoral seminar. And so I ended up spending a lot more time on teaching because I was developing that curriculum. So over time, as you do classes, it becomes less. And then sometimes, actually for a really long time, I've been teaching a 2-1, either because I've banked credits for different reasons, or we have a strong program director process, and program directors often get offloads. So when I was PhD director, I'd get an offload, which I actually think teaching would have been less work than being PhD director, but that's what they gave us. And right now I'm an interim director for one of our master's degrees. So like that takes a little bit of time. But I would say that just in general, the job's different all the time. Like it depends what I'm teaching. I keep track of my time really carefully because just to see. And right now, if I can get 20 to 30% of my time with research, I'm like, hey, that was a great week. And that's kind of where I am in my life right now. I also have a young kid and that's just taking a lot of my time. And so that, you know, I've made those choices. But then like in the summer, I'm not teaching. Thank goodness the committees stop. And like I write all summer. And that's where, you know, I can still stand up for like what I need to do for my research, but I do a lot more of it in the summer. So there is that flexibility, especially once you have tenure, to kind of decide how you want to spend your day.
Okay, great. Well, I think I'd like to see if people have questions in the audience. So if you do, raise your hand. And if you don't know how to raise your hand, you go to reactions and look for the raised hand, and then that should work. And otherwise, I'll ask more questions. While we're waiting for people to raise their hands, if you're not averse to it, Melissa, maybe you could tell us about your experience as an academic.
Hi, everyone. So I am an assistant professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. I've been here since 2018. I teach in the Department of Public Management. We're a pretty large department. I think we have about 25 full-time faculty. We're a pretty diverse group of people. I teach mainly public budgeting courses at the undergraduate and graduate level. Also teach research methods. What else do I do? I also teach a course in applied economics for public administration and policy. So in terms of the way I divide up my time, it really depends upon what my teaching load is. So for instance, this semester, I'm teaching just one course. And the reason why I can get away with doing this is because I banked up some credits last year because I was teaching many courses a semester. So I'm able to focus more on research this semester. I've gotten a couple of papers out, so I'm pretty happy with my current teaching load. And in terms of service, it's kind of tricky. So pre-COVID, I was thinking I would be devoting 10 to 20% of my time to service. But then COVID hit, and there was no. We are in a teaching intensive school, so it's mostly it's basically a public liberal arts college. So there's a lot of emphasis on teaching and service for the students. So during COVID, none of that happened, right? Everything was offline. So now post-COVID, I'm probably only doing 5 to 10% of my time towards service. That's I think that's gone down for everyone as well. So in terms of service, what do I do? So I'm a faculty advisor for Pi Alpha Alpha, the honor society. So that's my tiny service commitment. I also am participating in a provost search. So I'm on the faculty committee for a provost search. I've done faculty search committees for our public budgeting field. We hired a new person last year, and I was active on the search committee. That's basically it.
Hey, well, thanks. I don't see if anybody's hand is up. But does anybody have any questions? Why don't you just
Bert, there's three
oh, there
hands
they
up.
are. I wasn't
Yep.
seeing them. Okay. And I think the Zoom.
I think Leonard was actually first and
Was he? I
then,
thought they
yep.
usually post the other way. Okay, Leonard, then Marie, and then Emma.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. So it's not really a question per se, because in the beginning I had challenges with connecting, so the audio wasn't coming through. I don't know how much I've missed already, but I don't know if you guys did like an introduction to everyone who was connected. So just so I'm not left out, I was going to introduce myself to all of you, but I'm happy to be here. I'm Leonard, and in the PhD program specializing in public finance and budgeting. So yeah, so happy to listen to all your stories. Thank you.
Okay, next is I think Emma.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. So I'm a third year student in the social policy field and hoping to maybe go on the job market later this year. So that's at the top of my mind. And I'm wondering, either from your experience, maybe serving on search committees, or in your own experience applying for academic jobs, what do you think is the most important advice we should be thinking about in putting together packages, reaching out to people, or what do you wish that you had done differently?
Great question.
Start early. Start earlier, because those deadlines come up quick. So it's going to depend where you want jobs. So like political science is really early in the fall for academic jobs. Public administration tends to kind of, the first round will clear before the end of the year, like in December. Urban studies tends to be a little bit later. Planning's a little bit later. I don't know all the fields, but they come pretty quickly. And then you have to have, depending on the schools, you have to have all your letters lined up. You have to have a cover letter, and you probably have to have a long cover letter and a short cover letter. And you have to have a research statement and a teaching statement and a diversity statement. And you have to have all these things together, and your CV. So just starting early, I wish I'd started a little earlier. As I've been a search committee chair, I've been on search committees. The first thing that I'm looking at, and it varies, school to school, so this is just me, is I'm looking at the cover letter and the CV. And the candidates that we're getting these days are just, they just blow my mind. Like, they're so good. And so I think obviously you have to finish your dissertation. That's the most important, or else you can't have these jobs. But I'm also looking for publications, and that's it's not to say we wouldn't hire someone without a publication, but I think that would be difficult. So that's something that I would definitely, for an academic job, focus on to the extent that you can. And I can thank Jeff for having any publications, because we wrote a couple things together as PhD students that probably helped me get my job. So definitely recommend that.
Can I
Thanks.
add something to that?
Sure.
The one thing I would say that I didn't know before being on a search committee is that typically a university a department knows what they're looking for, and it's like a pretty specific candidate. And often what happens is you get a really big pool of candidates, and a lot of those just fall away because they're great candidates, but not for that specific role. And so it can be really demoralizing to send a lot of applications and not get considered. And I think when you're a student, you just think, I'm terrible and nobody wants me. And it's really a match issue, and really focusing on where am I a really good match, and then really selling yourself as why you're the perfect match for that job. And obviously they're not jobs always that you are a good match. So finding a way to tell your story in a way that shows that you could be a good match gets you a little bit closer. And then if you don't make it, just remember, it is not personal. It does not mean anything about your quality as a scholar. It's just the very specific needs.
Thanks. Yeah, that's right. Having been on committees, and you get so many applications from people you think can't read, because we clearly say we're looking for someone in a different field, and there's a tendency, unless it says open or related or something, you're just wasting your time. And I forget which of you mentioned cover letters. I I always spend a lot of time, well, I think I'm done with that now. But I've always spent a lot of time on the cover letters. I don't know for sure if people read them, but I figure that's one shot, and some people do, and it'll really give people an idea of what your interests are and everything. Okay,
Yeah.
anybody else want to
Um,
answer that one?
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize what Mariglynn said as well about, sometimes they're just looking for a very specific thing. I think it's also sometimes a little bit harder to understand from the job posting. So for instance, at Oregon, we had like a planning, public policy, and management. So we had three different degrees: urban planning degree, public administration degree, and a nonprofit management degree. And sometimes job posting can be written in ways that are broad, where you think you want to apply, um, and you're not necessarily sure whether you're in the running for something that's more planning related, whether it's more public administration related. Uh, this happens because, at least at Oregon, and I'm guessing at other places as well, the school gets a tenure line, and that's what they're able to do. They're just looking for someone that might be a good candidate for one of those fields. So I think making the case for why you fit that school is really important. I think the other thing I would add is, as early as possible, try to practice your job market talk. I know I left that for way too late, and I didn't really think about it as much. And so, um, I think that's the thing. Uh, the faculty at Trachtenberg are amazing. They'll give you great feedback. So just think about where you can do practice job market talks as early as possible.
And we do have PhD students sign up for our research hour. So those of you in the audience who are at that stage, please consider signing up to give a talk at the research hour. And because we're not an economics department, the faculty won't be quite as nasty as they would there. Okay, Jeff, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. So I agree with everything. So trying to figure out what it hasn't been said. One, have a buddy. For me, it was Megan, and that a lot of that, once you get to the stage where you're applying, is just an ear, a shoulder to cry on, to talk to. You just need to release. And if you have a partner and the partner is not in academics, they'll understand the whole I didn't get a job offer element, but they're not going to understand the other emotional aspects of applying and all of that. So having a buddy with you who also is on the job market that you can confide in, hopefully you're not competing for the same job. Fortunately, Megan and I weren't. Then I think that was a real emotional sort of mental lifesaver for me. And then I make the case as often as I can for it's okay if, like, we're in a field where increasingly having applied experience matters, and it can set you apart and distinguish you. And I remember I got a job offer right out of PhD amongst the three or so that I applied to 4 or 5 schools, something like that. And one of them ended up with an offer and I turned it down. I decided there was somewhere else I wanted to be. I didn't want to be there. I wasn't going to settle. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to New York City and work for the city government. And that's what got me to somewhere where I do want to be. Now, I recognize I was single, no kid, no nothing, right? No obligation. I could do that. So from that privileged position, if you can, if you don't get any of the academic jobs that you want, part of me is like, don't settle. If you have to settle, then settle, right? Bust your butt, do what you need to make a name for yourself, then move on. But if you don't have to settle, at least immediately, especially with social equity in the last 10 years, you see a lot more state and local governments having certain states, I should say, having strong social equity initiatives, and so there's a home to get applied experience if folks don't have it. But yeah, that's more just a call. Like, if you have to settle, fine. But if you don't have to, you don't have to. Lots of options out there for government to give you the applied work. beef up your resume. The challenge is, of course, how do you keep publishing while you have a full-time non-academic job? I mean, I did it. It wasn't easy, but it's possible.
Thanks. All right, we have a question from Marie.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for being here, everyone. My question is about fundraising. I was trying to understand in your jobs, what are the expectations for raising funds in general or for your research specifically? And how much time do you spend on that effort? Thanks.
You know, that varies. Any of you in jobs where you're expected to raise money? You are, really? At Cleveland State?
So I somehow got it. My offer letter was different than everyone else's. I think they like forgot that. So now our offer letters say that you're expected to try to get funding. Mine didn't say that, but I still do. And that's because I want to support students. And that's how we get the money to hire more students. So yeah, I spend a fair amount of time, I'll do, for example, I just finished up a HUD grant with another Trachtenberg alumni, Eric Stoken, who's at UMBC. We applied to a couple grants. We got this HUD grant and we spent a couple of years working on that. And I've applied to NSF. I haven't gotten those, but so I do spend some time. I try to, because it's not required for my job, I won't spend a ton of time, but I try to do like maybe 2 a year. And hopefully they turn into stuff that I could maybe take a part of it and still make it into a paper, because especially the big ones, they're the length, like it takes as much time as writing a journal article. So it's kind of like trying to decide if it's worth it to do the grant that you might not get or the journal article. And that's, here, we don't have that expectation. I know some places do, and then that changes things.
Anyone else expected to raise money in your job?
Sorry. Sorry. Go ahead, Bert.
Oh, no, go ahead, Saurabh. I'll speak after you.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, I guess, so I think at Oregon, it wasn't an expectation and, certainly wasn't like required or anything like that, but I did do that mostly because of the type of work I was doing was doing a lot of work with partners and, we were doing a field experiment. So like that was the only way we could do it, is if we had funding for it. So I did do some fundraising there, though it wasn't an expected part of my job for promotion and tenure. Here, it is, I think, slightly more expected. It seems to be like a bit of more of the norm here in the UK. It is, I think, it's listed in the criteria for if you want to get promoted to full professor, that you are expected to have some grants. So I think that's something I'll probably have to focus a little bit more on now. But yeah.
So in my experience, it's going to vary a lot depending on where you're teaching and what university you're at. And also probably at least as much of it is not just the type of the school, but the type of department. If you're in a school of public health, as Jordan is, where he's working, you're expected not only to bring in money to cover yourself, but also your students. And I don't know if they expect you to start the first year, but pretty heavily after that. And in public policy, public administration schools, it's much less common, but it's going to vary by school. My first job, the department chair he essentially told us not to. He said I had to give him like at least 2 years notice if I wanted release time for a research grant. I said, well, they don't work that way, but that's uncommon. So it's going to vary a lot depending on where you apply, what the expectations are. And one of the things you might ask when you get interviews is what's expected, what's rewarded, because there's two separate issues. As we heard, some schools will require it or almost require it. In other schools, they won't require it, but it'll be considered a plus and it'll help you. You'll get release time and they'll be glad you do it. In other schools, they just don't care. So it just varies depending on the culture and specifically the field. If you're in a STEM field or a health or medical field, you'll be expected to bring in money fairly quickly. Okay, do we have time? We have time for one more question from somebody before we break into rooms?
Got a hand raised. Jordan's hand's raised.
Yes.
No, no.
I have a question. I'm Jordan. I'm in my third year in the public finance field. I kind of understand. I feel like I have a good understanding of the research side of things and that part of your job, which is obviously only part of your job as you talked about. But what are some things that have like surprised you, or maybe you weren't expecting or you weren't ready for interpersonally in the academic department? So like not necessarily like your workload, but what are some of the things that kind of shocked you once you got into your role about how to just manage being a professor and being on that side of the academic world?
I was not ready for the emotional labor. When I started, I was fairly young, and we have a more non-traditional student base. So even now, like I'm finally getting to the point where I'm not the youngest person in my classroom, or not one of the youngest people. So I'm finally like older. But I think being a young female, and what I hear from colleagues is it's definitely much more if you're a person of color, but like having students come into my office and cry, and like hearing, this week a student says, I don't think I'm gonna be able to take the midterm because my brother died this morning. Or, a colleague, when I shared that with a colleague says, yeah, I got a message that my students aren't going to do the Blackboard post because they're living in their car. And like some of that stuff that is probably unique to, maybe not, well, we know it's not unique to our student body, but it's especially true of our student body. I just wasn't prepared for that. I'm not a like, yay, huggy, emotional kind of person necessarily. And so that was a lot for me to deal with, was that like emotional labor part.
Thanks.
I can add to that really quickly. I think academics have a somewhat specific personality type. If you did personality testing across, a lot of people select into it because of sort of the way they process and the way they work. And if you work that way, that's really great. If you find out that you don't work that way, or that your personality type is a little bit different, it can be swimming upstream quite a bit. Academics tend to be pretty slow to innovation, and they're very deliberating and kind of want to keep things the way that they have been. And that can be really hard if that's not sort of where you are coming from. And so I think sort of knowing your strengths and weaknesses as you go in will help you understand sort of how you interact with the colleagues that you encounter in an academic job.
Yeah, just want to add, I mean, I think, agree with what Megan and Mariglynn talked about. And I think that emotional labor part especially as well, because, like for instance, at Oregon, they want a lot of international students. So, all of the international students would basically come to me because I was the only one who, was from outside of the US. So I think, you get a lot of that emotional labor, but just kind of, it can get intense. I think the other side of that I will add is that I think I've worked with government and I've worked with universities, and I think the kind of navigating bureaucracy in universities can sometimes be harder than navigating bureaucracy in government. And I would just add that that does take a lot of time and can often be pretty, I don't know, stressful in ways that you weren't quite expecting. Yeah, that's just I've had to spend more time on an expense report than I thought was necessary.
I know that feeling. I've had that happen. Okay, well, it's just about 4:50, which is around when we were going to break into the breakout rooms. Anybody have a quick last question? Otherwise, I'll have Denise tell you what to do next.